So one of the things I wanted to talk to you about today is finasteride, and
Ah,
we'll dive
poison.
into that. So I had recent podcasts on this, but I did want to talk about it with you because I know you're more than happy to discuss it, and it's an interesting topic because so for people who I think most people have heard of finasteride, but for people who don't know, finasteride basically blocks the conversion from testosterone to DHT, right? DHT is a far more androgenic hormone, and therefore that's what's going to help with, let's say, hair loss. It's prescribed for prostate issues. And the concern is that if you're blocking DHT, I mean, in theory, you could have slightly higher estrogen, but just the act of blocking the DHT itself can cause side effects like gynecomastia, erectile dysfunction, other like libido issues, and mood issues. And this is something that I think a lot of men have considered because most men don't want to lose their hair. And I have a number of friends in the last few years who have started taking it, and they all say that it's been fine. They haven't noticed any issues at all. People in the community, like online community, I mentioned not having any issues with it. And I've avoided it up to this point because of the concerns for the side effects. And I think if I was honestly just like your average guy and not overly concerned about health in general, I just would be like, okay, it's not that big of a deal, one pill. But because I'm kind of OCD about a lot of this stuff, I do get concerned about even the low risk of side effects. And I know when Eric and I had spoken, he said, there's basically no side effects if you look at the studies and whatnot. And I think if you look at the studies, it is a low percentage. But I also don't want to just nod my head along with that and say, yeah, there's no issues with it. There are absolutely some reported side effects in the studies. Compared to placebo, it is relatively low. But then, of course, you have the contrast with anecdote, right? A lot of online anecdote and the YouTube comments and the things like that, where it's like, oh, this was horrible. And, this post-finasteride syndrome, I've never been able to have, normal sex again and whatnot. And it gets muddied very quickly. So I'll start with that because I just kind of monologue for a while. But initial thoughts, Steve?
So I have 5 to 10 post-finasteride consultations per month because I made a fun video about it. So I've been helping people get off this issue for years now, and it's way more common than you think. And when they come to me, they're desperate because my prices are not cheap. Right? I charge quite a bit for consultation. So I made a video basically detailing everything how to get out of post-finasteride syndrome with a couple of things that I've learned since then. But it's actually very common, or at least from the consultations that I see. So I already had 2 this month, and I might have 2 or 3 more. It's actually quite a sad because all these guys they see Keeps, for example, or
Mhm.
other advertisements for finasteride and hair systems or hair preservation systems, just an online prescription and you're ready to go. And then a small percentage of those guys get adverse side effects that takes months, years, decades to resolve. And then, and I think a lot of people just don't understand the potential risks of that. So you need to research finasteride and dutasteride quite heavily before you even look into that. And I would, leverage every other option before you look into DHT blockade to preserve your hair. Like a lot of guys just don't eat right. A lot of guys are just highly stressed. A lot of guys just wear a cap all day, and that also makes it worse, right? It cuts off your circulation. So all these little things you can look into. It's same as acne. Acne has 1,000 solutions, and the last option is Accutane.
Mhm.
That's the last one. So you could do topical ketoconazole or minoxidil before you try oral finasteride. So, but a lot of guys just go straight to the most invasive method ever, and then DHT shuts down, their libido crashes, they have cognitive decline because allopregnanolone, which converts through 5-alpha reductase from progesterone into allopregnanolone, also goes away. And then you feel a bit stressed, you can't really relax, you don't have any good memory formation, all these little cognitive things happen. And in the beginning, you think your libido is shit, but then later on, you also can't focus. So I think it's just one of these last things to look into. And if you want to do derma rolling with ketoconazole at 2%, 5%, I think that's better than going straight to finasteride. And I wouldn't even touch ketoconazole because it inhibits multiple steps of the steroidogenesis cascade. So now you're preventing the conversion of several steps, and now your testosterone levels are lower if it goes systemic. And
Yeah.
of course, with derma rolling, if you do the derma rolling, you create all these little micro abrasions for collagen synthesis, and then you put the ketoconazole or the minoxidil, also inhibits several steps of testosterone synthesis. Once that goes systemic, you just ruin your levels. So, and then what are you going to do? Megadose of zinc to bring it back up again?
Yeah. I
You
do.
know,
I think,
create a copper deficiency, which also is needed for collagen synthesis. It all overlaps, man.
yeah. So the acne example, I would agree with. I mean, obviously, there's some people with some very stubborn acne, but I do think if somebody is destined to be like a Norwood 7 and they have like legitimate androgenic alopecia, I mean, decreasing your stress is not going to change that. Maybe it will
No, of
change the
course not. Of
pace of
course not.
it. But yeah, I just don't want
Yeah,
people thinking like, oh, if I get some red laser therapy and some derma rolling, I'm gonna, not go bald. Like that's a small, factor. I actually used ketoconazole years ago, and I've discussed on this podcast a few times different unilateral experiments I've done. Right, I trained one calf only for 3 years, and I
you're
did
right,
other
right.
stuff. Right, I actually people will laugh to hear that I actually, when I heard about ketoconazole shampoo, I was like, well, let me see if this does anything. Well, wouldn't you know it, I just used it on one half of my head for over a year. And I literally was like trying to like, okay, because I'm like anything like this, the reason I do is because I'm like, look, if I'm going to be spending this money and I'm going to use this for a lifetime, I want to see if it actually does anything. And so I did that for at least a year. Not only did I not see any benefit, I would say that the left side is actually now slightly thinner than the right side. Now, is that just coincidence? Could be. The major point I
Mhm.
have is that there definitely was no benefit. If ketoconazole has any benefit, it is a small benefit. And again, I noticed actually nothing from it at all. So I don't recommend it just based on my experience. And the studies are very unimpressive as well.
Yeah,
Minoxidil, there is good evidence for minoxidil, but it's more for like the crown.
yeah.
If basically back here for people who are balding there. I do think finasteride is the best medical treatment in terms of results. But then, of course, you're going to see. I mean, it's like if I was like, oh my God, like the entire population has rampant periodontal disease. Well, is that the case, or do I just see the patients with periodontal
It's
disease,
just
right?
a 0.5% or 1%. It's the same guys that don't respond well to testosterone. There's a very small percentage of those guys, but since the hormone community is so big,
Yeah,
there's now hundreds of thousands, well, not hundreds of thousands, but there's, let's say, 1,000 or 2,000 people on nandrolone only
yeah.
because they respond better to nandrolone. And this is another way to preserve their hair because their
Mm,
testosterone is basically zero, their DHT is zero, their estrogen is somewhat in range, albeit at the bottom, which you can mitigate with other practices. So they do nandrolone only, and they don't experience any hair loss. If anything, they regrow their hair because the
right,
test and DHT is so low that
right, right.
there's no negative effect on further hair loss or
Yeah.
further hair growth. Um, but yeah, that's a very small percentage, but maybe those guys speak the loudest. And again, when I say that I have a lot of post-finasteride syndrome guys, it's because those are the guys that come to me for help. I don't get the guys that come to me telling me or
How
paying for a
great it was, right?
consultation where they say, I use finasteride and it worked. Look at my fucking hair. Look at
Yeah,
this. Look at
yeah.
this, Steve. You should
Right,
try it. They're not
right.
gonna call me because they got the results that they expected. So
Yeah.
I would just tell everybody to proceed with caution. And if you do it, just make sure you do your blood work first. You check your DHT levels because a lot of guys say their DHT levels are high, but it's not.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, it'll
again,
still, yeah, I mean, I forget the exact percentage that it should decrease it. It seems to range, I've heard from 50 to 75%, depending on the
mhm,
study. But the point being is it's not like dutasteride, it's not your DHC isn't going to go to zero, it's just going to decrease it. So for a lot of people and the reason just for people who have not dutasteride, you could look at it almost like a stronger form of finasteride,
and it's a
right?
longer last.
Longer lasting, and basically works on the different isoforms. So there's three isoforms, and so finasteride is only working on one of those. And so, and actually, I do know people. I think Derek from More Plays More Dates. I think he's on dutasteride for life, or at least that's his
No,
plan.
I think he's on finasteride, 1 milligram per day, but I could be mistaken.
I
And he has zero side effects. Zero.
Yeah,
His libido is great. His hair loss slowed down. He's too busy to really do the full hair loss system that he was doing before. So you
right,
see
right,
a little bit
right.
of thinning again. Could be the stress from operating so many businesses. But
Yeah.
he settled down. He's got a beautiful girlfriend and he's
Oh,
happy.
really?
And so maybe that's also like, okay, I'm off the market. I can chill a little bit, right?
Yeah,
That
yeah,
happens to couples. They kind of relax.
yeah,
You
yeah.
don't need to be so vain anymore. And
Right.
let's be honest, most of the guys that really give a shit about their hair, they're all in the dating pool, man.